Again, Joe Ryan from Clemson, South Carolina, professor of special education there, and I started the Clemson Life program. My background is in behavior disorders. I've taught K through 12, from public school to special day school to residential treatment facilities. So my background has always been behavior. It's my love of all, and that's my favorite course for teaching the teacher candidates as they come through. Part of which is we're going to talk about today is on data collection. Okay, we've gone into the process where everybody says, make data decisions for the school and everything else. And there's nothing more important for collecting data for behavior for the same principles there. Because I've learned really quickly over the years is if I came in and talked with teachers on a Monday and I go, well, can you evaluate little Joey in your classroom? On a Monday, Joey does pretty good. Joey's fine, as a matter of fact. If I came back to that same teacher and gave that same assessment on Friday, little Joey was spawned from Satan himself. So in other words, when we talk about behavior, too often in IEP meetings and everything else, when we're talking with principals and parents and everything else, there's too much emotion involved, okay? And the emotion many times is based on our own burnout in regards to how many students that we have, paraprofessionals didn't show up, it's before Christmas break or whatever else, and these kids are ready to go. So in other words, there's too many factors there, and we're making basically decisions on improvement of a child's behavior based on our own emotional reflection of that. And we're not very good at that, okay? We just aren't. And that's why database decisions are much better. But before we get started, I just want to find out a little bit about you, who we have. How many special ed teachers do we have in the room? Okay, good number. How many administrators? Good. About 50-50 almost. How many counselors? Okay, there's a few shy hiding in the back there in regards to that. Okay, you're not left alone. And anybody else that I missed? Who else do we have representative here? What do we have? What professions?
Behavior.
Behavior, awesome. Behaviors? Okay, awesome. And anything else? Yes. School psychologist, outstanding. Okay, so this will be in your swim lane. Some of my doctoral students are school psychologists, so we'll find out is even though I go, Michelle, how many observations have you done? She'd be like thousands, and I send her in to do research in the school, and she can't come back with a consistent observation of a child because it's challenging. It sounds easy, but actually when you get into the classroom with 20 other kids, it's very challenging collecting data, and that's what we're going to talk about, different methodologies. And again, I'm sure the best thing is, how many BD teachers here real quick? Where's my love of life there? Okay, you guys are the greatest people to hang out in happy hour there. You have the greatest stories of all time there. Here's some great ones that you can see there, disrupting class, claiming to be reborn Jesus, hitting another student with a Bible. In other words, we could stay here for the next 2 hours and just share great stories about behavior that you've witnessed in the schools there. How do you quantify these types of behaviors? That's what we're going to talk about. And how do you observe them accurately to see if you're actually making a change? What we're going to talk about today is the importance of collecting data, which we broached about a little bit. We're going to talk about anecdotal reports, finding out what the underlying functions of behavior is. In other words, that's the most important thing because many behaviors, the reason we're having meetings with parents is because it's a repetitive nature. Okay? And Einstein's definition of insanity is doing what? Same thing over and over and hoping for different results. Well, if we've suspended a child, done all these different things, sent them to the principal, where are my administrators again? How many of you can set your clock by a student showing up at your door front or whatever else, okay? Those are the things that we're going to talk about today. In other words, that serves a function for that child's behavior. Regardless of the student goes, hey, I keep sending Joey out of my classroom or whatever else is, and you got to be shaking your head. It's like, well, obviously what we're doing is sending them to the office is not working here. So we're going to talk about a little bit about that. The key, the crux of what we're going to talk about is data collection itself, the different methodologies for it. There's no perfect method for it. But based on the child and the behavior that you're seeing, certain observation methods are much more efficient at painting an accurate picture of how much he displays the behavior, does not display the behavior. And so we're going to go through that, and then we're going to, at the end, have a little case study. If you should be online, Daniel or whatever else. If it's not, I'll post it here. I have a PDF of it so you can read some key points of it. And we'll see of Daniel, okay, which behaviors would you like to address? Because think of the most challenging students that you have. Was there only one behavior that Joey was ever there for your office for? No, there's probably a dozen or not behaviors in regards to that. So which behaviors that you want to address, and then what do you think a good data collection method to observe change would be for that? We'll talk about that at the end. We're going to talk about reliability. And this is an issue, even among people like school psychologists and everything else who do this for a living almost every day, it's still very challenging. We're going to talk about some of the challenges of collecting data reliably. Okay? And we're going to talk about some single case designs, and this is basically to show how you've improved, how you've not improved the child's behavior. And so we'll touch upon all about that today there. But again, the first importance of data collection there is, again, it basically gives you a baseline. And when I say a baseline, what it is I need to be able to predict the child's future performance there. You all invest in your 401ks, right, into the stock market and everything else there. Anybody buy stocks? Anybody invest in the stocks on their own or whatever else? Well, before you buy a stock, you want to be pretty confident what that performance is going to be. So if you wanted to invest in Netflix or whatever else, you want to be pretty convinced that you weren't buying at the all-time high and the next day that it crashes down to the floor. Does that make sense? Before we change behavior, I want to actually know how frequently the behavior occurs for a maladaptive behavior or how infrequently a pro-social behavior. Because we're not only talking about maladaptive behaviors, many times I'll talk with the teacher counselor, they go, first name is? Corey. Corey doesn't have any maladaptive behaviors. Corey's a great kid. Like, okay. But what pro-social behavior does Corey not display in your classroom that you would like him, that would make him succeed either better socially with his friends or succeed in the classroom? Does that make sense? So it's not always a maladaptive behavior. Sometimes it's an absence of a pro-social behavior there. We want to determine the success of failure in intervention. How many people have, you've tried an intervention with Joey, and at the end you go, was it successful after a day or two? And after one day, it's like, yeah, it was really successful. Well, was it? Or was it just a good day for Joey? Or was it a really good day for the teacher that she was in a good mood, she had rest over the weekend or whatever? So all those factors, I want to be able to plot that behavior for the child and see if it changes. And if it's not changing, well, obviously, we talked about Einstein's definition of insanity. I don't want to keep doing the same thing. I don't want to keep sending the child down to the administrator's office when I know it's not changing any of his behaviors. Okay? How many here have had parents who are like, I punished him. I did something. But the behavior didn't go away, did it? Well, and technically, as a behavior specialist, where's my counselors again in school psych? Says, is that a punishment? She's hiding all the way in the back of the troublemakers. Look at that. Because a punishment is something that reduces the likelihood of the behavior to occur. And so many times they say, oh, well, I punished him or whatever else. Says, yeah, you may be given an intervention for it after all, but if it's ineffective, it hasn't reduced it, it's not a punishment. It's never reduced it. And many times what we do is we actually do a lot of behaviors that reinforce a behavior. And similar to the kicking, where's my administrators again? Your children who you keep seeing all the time and everything else is, getting kicked out of the class is actually a reinforcer for many of them. Because what happens is, and this is the problem with many teachers, is they don't understand is the teacher kicks Deborah out of the classroom. Well, I lose the aversive of my classroom. So what happens is I'm going to do it again because it's reinforcing to me. It's also Deborah hated my math class. So she gets to escape it. So I have both parties being reinforced, and I have the poor administrator in the middle going, my gosh, I could set the time, 5 minutes. And he goes, I do this for her, and then he's going to kick me out of the classroom. So those are the things what we want to collect data for there. And also for those, because we're all special educators, many times I'm talking general educators, is you understand is we have to do accountability. In other words, is how has Joey improved over this academic year? What is his quarterly report? So it helps with that. Different methods we can collect. One is qualitative, and I love qualitative, but it's not very useful for us in our field here because we just don't have the time and day for it there. But it makes for great books. I don't know if anybody read Gang Leader for a Day? Qualitative is a great thing. So, doc student coming out of Chicago or whatever else wants to understand why people get involved in gangs and everything else because gangs really don't pay. The average gang member makes as much as a person working at Walmart. Why would you do that? Why would you risk getting shot, going to jail, everything else to make as much as somebody, my friend, who works at Walmart there? And so he tried to find out, and he goes down, and he goes, well, I'll create interviews, just like every good psych student does. I'll do interviews. So he goes down to the projects with surveys. Yeah, not a really good smart move or whatever else, especially because he's Indian. So they don't know what he is. They think it's somebody moving in on his gang territory. He doesn't look Mexican, but he's as close as we could figure out in regards to that. So they hold him hostage, and basically they bring him to the gang leader, who was actually a college grad. And he goes, I played this game. I didn't like it or whatever else. I figured I could make more running my own business or whatever else. And he looked at him and goes, hey, do you want to get killed? This is a good way to get killed right here. If you want to understand it, follow me around. And I'll show you when do you use violence, when do you not use violence. If you always use violence, it's not good for business, is it? Nobody's coming from the suburbs to buy your drugs if you use violence all the time. So he brings them, that's a qualitative method. You don't have time to go through your lives and live with the students or whatever to do these things. So qualitative is interviews, surveys, ethnographic observations there, and living with the participants itself. That's an example of a participant observer. In other words, you're getting involved with the gang itself to tell the story. Great storytelling. You don't have time to sit with 6th graders for a full year or whatever else to learn the who's and what's and the withedness of regards to that. We're going to stick with the quantitative observations. And the quantitative is really concerned with the counting. How frequently does a behavior occur? But it sounds a lot easier than it actually is there, okay? Because the key is we have to define the behavior precisely. And how many, again, have told, whether you're a BD teacher or anything else, and you put the child into the gen ed environment, and the teacher comes back and he goes, he's obnoxious. Okay. Renee, what does obnoxious mean to you? I grew up in a kid, youngest of 6 things. I mean, obnoxious could mean a whole, family of money. There's a whole different meaning depending upon your background culturally and everything else there. So it's very difficult to quantify something. So typically what we're going to do is we're going to learn to go and observe and to operationalize the behavior that the teacher wants there. Okay? And again, we're going to look at times and places because, again, I want to compare apples to apples, not apples to oranges. How many here have children that take psychotropic medications? Raise your hands. Okay, with some of your students, yeah. How many here, do they behave differently at 9 a.m. than they do at 3 p.m.? Why is that? Especially for ADHD, because the typical medication, the dosage is 4 to 6 hours there. So it's a much different child at the end of the afternoon. So I don't want to compare Joey's behavior in the morning in math to the afternoon in science because there may be other factors that go in. Again, if it's a younger kid, they just stop what? Nap time once they get into kindergarten, 1st grade, right? So all those other factors may play into, so I want to compare apples to apples each day. Consistently, same thing, because again, I might love science, but I hate your math class. So but I want to compare the same time, the same teacher, the same influences. Because again, in middle and high school I may have other instigators in certain class that I don't have in other classroom now. As we shift over there may be somebody who's picking on me, bullying me, or whatever else that's not present in other environments. She's picking out the person who's picking on her. All right. So types of observations. This is another thing. I love Far Side. So you'll see this a lot in the thing there. It's like, again, the cows are hanging out, car, they'll go back and everything else. How many was my school counselor and everything else? You've gone into the classroom to observe, or the administrators, and you're looking at Joey. Does Joey behave those same behaviors? No, nobody's going to display it. And when they know, especially when somebody else that's not used to that environment comes in, they know exactly what that person's in that room for or whatever else. So in other words, it's an obtrusive environment. Okay, so an unobtrusive is maybe you hang out for a few days prior to your data collection, so he or she is kind of used to you being in the classroom. You hang in the back or whatever else, so it's much more natural. Okay, but the first time, as I remember elementary school, I'd walk into a 2nd grade or 1st grade. How many men are in elementary school? Like 2, including the janitor? I mean, in other words, so you walk into the class, like, who are you? Who's that, you? And in other words, it's right away, it's like, this is not going to be an unobtrusive observation in the classroom. So you have to get to the point where the kids are used to you, whoever the data collector is, come in the classroom, and then after several days, you don't have to say too long or whatever, they get used to you, then those natural behaviors will start reoccurring again in there. And again, contrived and naturalistic. I don't know how many IEP meetings that I've been there, and I've seen the school counselor, write up this thing that Joey was the wonderful child, responded great one-on-one or whatever else. Do you teach the child one-on-one in the classroom? No. In other words, especially if it's attention-seeking behavior, that child is in heaven because he's got adult attention one-on-one. You will see beautiful behavior from the child exhibited. He said please. He said thank you. He played all my games or whatever else. And then you put him back in the classroom with 20 other kids, and what happens? Different child. Okay? And we've known for many decades that kids behave differently. Just think of yourself and your families. When you get back together in this group as a family, even reunion, even though you're 40, 50, 30 years old, do you go back and revert to different behaviors than you would with your friends? Of course, we act differently in groups than we do individually there. So understanding is that when you're taking the observations, is it obtrusive? And also, is it, you want it as naturalistic as possible. You don't want to bring them into the school counselor's office or the principal's office and start taking your observations. It's not as meaningful. The key here we're going to talk about is behavior. And this is what we're going to practice on here, is it needs to be observable and measurable. Okay? How are you feeling today?
Great.
Great. can I measure great? How easy is it for me to come in the classroom and see Lauren or whatever else and go, she looks wonderful today, not great. She looks, in other words, oh, she looks so-so. Not an observable behavior. All right, so what I want to do is, now I can measure, does she talk with other peers? In other words, is she introverted? She's not talking with anybody, shutting down? Is she smiling? I want observable behaviors that I can measure on a regular basis. Does that make sense? So in other words, is you also hear a behavior called a response. Timmy picks his nose, all right, during academic seat work there. Is that good? Is that a good definition? How many are Seinfeld fans? 1/3 of the audience got the joke there. What was it? Was it a scratch or was it a pick? Okay, so in other words, we're going to talk about operationalizing the behavior that is absolute, there's no doubt whether it was, and he lost a date with a model or whatever because she saw him scratching/picking his nose. What consists of picking the nose? What consists of scratching? You need to be that detailed so people across the room can observe, Joey and see that it was a scratch or it was a pick. Does that make sense? All right. Basic concepts. Understand what we're going to talk about is adaptive behavior is learned. Both maladaptive and adaptive behaviors are going to be learned by the students there. Okay? And so we're going to talk about reinforcements and consequences later there. All right? All right. Other benefits of defining the target behavior there. Enable staff to focus on the intervention between the environment and the student rather than just blaming the student there. I don't know how many times I've heard, he's a bad kid, he's, disruptive behavior or whatever. What's the cause? We're looking really for the cause of the behavior itself there. And again, understanding the behavior allows me to figure out the function of the behavior so I can identify an intervention that resolves it there. All right, and so we're going to talk about functions of behavior. I'll give you mnemonic California grapes so you can remember them very easily there for the different functions of behavior. We're going to measure characteristics of it there. I talked already about it. When we talk about behaviors, I want to measure across different settings to see if it occurs or doesn't occur. Because if Joey misbehaves in your class but doesn't misbehave in your class, then I'm like, well, is it the behavior management system that the teachers have in place? Is it maybe a student or is it the ecological environment in the classrooms? In other words, it's maybe not all the times on the student. How many here have seen that one or whatever else where you're basically acting as a consultant to the teacher? Because you may have several teachers that have no problem with the student, but only one does. And then you have to go in to sit in the classroom to find or determine why. Does it happen across times? We talked about that, certain things like medications, tiredness, or whatever else is. Kids may be behaving. Steve may be great in the morning, but he wears out in the afternoon there, okay? So when does the teacher have? What academic scheduling do they put in there? Do they put the more challenging courses like math in the morning when he's fresher and more hands-on activities like art, science, where you can go out, collect leaves and look at that in the afternoon where you can move around because he's already been tied to a desk for 6 hours? So all those different things we're talking about. All right, types of behaviors that you want to look at. Obviously, the number one is that when you get called in as harmful behaviors, self-injurious behaviors, head-banging behaviors, scratching, cutting, anything along those lines, or would take top priority to deal with. But you also maybe, I run, life program, we have a lot of students with autism. Stereotypic behavior. How many here deal with children with autism? Okay. We have the cat bus system in the morning that our students, we teach them to ride and they come in there and they're packed, for especially if you're coming in like a 9 o'clock class and everything. Standing room only. You go into some of my students, you go in there, they've got seats available on either side. Big bubble around them. Why is that? Because the student's rocking back and forth. How many people are very comfortable when a person's going back and forth, sitting down next to the person who's doing stereotypical behaviors like that? So again, it's the importance of understanding the important stereotypic behaviors you may want to deal with so they can fit in more socially with their peers. And I talked about infrequent, absent, desirable behavior. Maybe they don't have any maladaptive behaviors that are serious, but maybe they're not displaying the pro-social behaviors that would be typical of an age of kindergarten, first grade, second grade behaviors. The please, the thank yous, the asking for things. And then again, normal behavior, this is truly the ED, normal behavior exhibited in inappropriate times. I've never had an ED kid that didn't do any other behavior that every one of us did. They'll just do it at random times in order or whatever else. That makes it extremely inappropriate there. When you finally get, where's my ED teachers? When you all get them in together, the entire school together, is somebody going to act out? Yeah. And it's a perfect behavior that other kids would do in the recess ground or anything else that would be perfectly fine. But the fact that the principal was standing up there or guest speaker, not an appropriate time for that behavior that he or she displayed. Okay. The selection. How you select behaviors, social significance, again, rocking self-stim I talked about. Clinical significance. Does it deviate from the norm? And this is where the school counselor comes in really well. if you're not an expert, for kindergarten or second grade, is that a typical behavior that a kindergarten would display? Is that a typical behavior for a middle schooler to display? Organizational significance. I teach bullying prevention for Ulvius. You know, is there bullying going on in the school or whatever else? Something that's all school-wide that you want to deal with. Personal significance, and again, is there something for the individual? A lot of my life students, we have mentors for each one, is they're meant to internalize it. I just want to have more friends, okay? Well, how do we meet friends? How do we engage other people there? So maybe it's a pro-social behavior you want to teach. How do you interact with new people that you first meet? The importance of social validation there, and again, is you can pick either two ways. Social comparison, when you're looking at the thing, is identify their peers and see what their peers are doing. So you go into a first grade classroom, what does a typical first grader do at this thing? How do they interact? And look at Joey. Or if I'm not familiar with that, I could do subjective evaluation, which I can bring in the school counselor, somebody else who's extremely familiar with the developmental stages of that one, and they can determine what behaviors to work at, what the deficits are. Again, target behavior, I want it to be objective, observable characteristics. So anytime they say he doesn't do something or whatever else, what do you want the child to do? So I can observe that. Clear, so I can have different people looking at the same thing who come in, and I can come in and observe, and I know exactly what you want to do. And completeness, out-of-seat behavior. What does out-of-seat behavior look like, Steve, for you in your classroom? I don't know if you're teaching or not, but we're going to throw you back in as a teacher in the classroom. What does out-of-seat behavior for Joey consist of?
Running around the classroom.
Running around the classroom, okay? What does out-of-seat behavior consist for you?
Lying on the floor.
Lying on the floor. But you see how the operationalized definition, if I came in, I would only count lying on the floor as being out of the seat. Other made people, so you have to be so specific where it's buttocks out of the chair or whatever else. Or if the kid's ADHD, I've had a lot of teachers that go, well, it's fine, give him a little room, but as long as one part of his body is touching his seat, he's fine. But if he loses contact with the seat, that consists, because now he can instigate peers and everything else. I don't care what your definition is, but it needs to be so consistent that everybody will recognize it. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's the thing. The potted plant test, if a plant can do it, it's not a behavior, operationalized behavior. He doesn't listen. I can't measure that at all, okay? So in other words, is what did you want him to do? I want him to comply with teacher instructions within X number of seconds. So line up for the door for the classroom. Needs to comply within 30 seconds, okay? We're talking about latency. How fast does he do that? Make sense? Okay. I'm going to give you a couple examples here as we go forward there. So if they say Tom is disruptive, what you want to do is think of clarifying, like, Tom makes inappropriate comments during class or discussion or whatever. This is dumb or whatever. And then maybe it's even just give a couple examples, because again, if it's something like that, he'll say 100 different things. So provide the observer an example or two what that would consist of. Okay? The stranger test, make sure it's clear enough that different people come in and all observe and recognize when that behavior occurred, when it did not occur. And again, a couple examples. Janiyah does not do her classwork, and this is what I just did we were doing a play therapy intervention at for a special day school, and so we came in, that's what the teacher came in. Well, we couldn't measure that for Jack, okay? There was no way. So what we did was, okay, Janiyah frequently talks to her peers, does unassigned tasks, or calls out for help. And I go to the teacher, and then I go, does that represent what you were trying to get across? Now I can observe that for Janiyah to see if our play therapy works enough for her. Other example, Tim does not pay attention to class. Again, very simple, again, is, well, Tim looks around the room during math class or looks at his desk. Whatever the behavior specific to that child is, so operationalize. And again, the reason I give the examples are for you can look back, because in a week, 2 weeks, you're never going to remember exactly the sample. So every one of these have an example on the bottom. And again, you can always email me too if you get confused. All right, anecdotal reports. This is, again, what I want you to do is provide as descriptive as possible of what the child's doing. Because the first thing you're going to do is when you come into the classroom is, you may know Renee, but I don't really know what's going on in the classroom. I just know she's disruptive in the class. And so now I'm trying to get just the fact. You know, maybe Joe Friday from Dragnet, just collect the facts, not your opinions of why she's doing it. Just tell what's going on there. To describe the setting, differentiate your fact from opinion there, and describe everything the student says or does. Okay? It's just basically I'm trying to figure out and come up with a better operationalized definition and start to guess on the purpose or the function of why Renee acts this way. Okay, so this is the first thing. I'm not collecting data other than just to look at and see where the problem behaviors are. I'm looking at two things, the antecedents and the consequences, what comes before the target behavior and what comes after it, because I want to see something that causes it. Especially for autism, I don't have to worry about it because I can just prevent the situation from occurring. Okay? So in other words, autism has huge issues with personal body spaces. Our natural spaces, and I'm going to come in, tell me when I violate your personal space. Whoa, those eyes went up, even the hands moved up. It's typically about an arm and a half length away from us. Okay? When you get upset, it gets even bigger as the personal space for the student there. Okay? Autism has huge personal space issues there. That's why a lot of the fights happen where? Hallways, buses coming to school and going home, all those issues there, okay? So what I want to say is, if I can avoid that, well, if Joey has autism, I'll send Joey 5 minutes early from class, before 400 kids are all in the hallway. Or what I'll do is, help me, and then after the bell rings, then I'll send them again with a buddy or whatever else. Does that make sense? I can avoid those scenarios. Same thing for buses. Rather than putting them on a bus, which is jam-packed, and it's kind of like running on the New York City subways or whatever else is, we'll just make an early run. We'll make an early run, or we'll make a late run. And so you avoid. So knowing the antecedents is critical with avoiding behaviors many times. The consequence is what happens afterwards. And I've talked about the administrators seeing the same kid all the time and everything. If I allow Deborah to keep escaping the classroom, she's being reinforced because she's getting to escape the environment that she wants. So that's why it's really important to understand that first one is, it helps me operationalize the behavior to get a better one to what I'm going to look at, but understands what is the purpose, and that's going to come up to our intervention later, because the intervention has to satisfy her need for escape. Does that make sense? If I don't do that, I don't care how great of a plan you have, it's not going to work because you're not satisfying her need. Okay, so here's an ABC observation. And what an ABC is basically is you go in there, and again, I kind of get the gist is he's acting out in class, he's trying to escape or whatever else. I'm trying to tell a storyline here. So what happened before the problem behaviors, what happened afterwards. And all I'm doing is recording it. And basically I'm kind of guessing over here is, what do I think the student was doing? So now the teacher asked to get the math book out, the student put his head down on his desk. Is that every high school student that you've seen in Spanish class or whatever else is? And what happened? The teacher repeats this escape. And basically what was the function? To escape, he didn't want it to do that. That was my best guess for it. Could be something else or whatever else. If there's possibly two, I'll put a slash and I'll put another one, but maybe. What I'm looking for is a trend line here of why a student behaves inappropriately. Does that make sense? Okay? So this is what the ABC is. And many times what you'll see also is it'll start basically a storyline here. The desks never just go flying. I'm going to talk about aggressive, de-escalation tomorrow there. Desks never just go flying across your classroom. Never. What the teacher missed was the storyline that led up to the desks go flying across the thing. And this helps you develop this. In other words, and the same thing, I can work with teachers and go, how is he or she responding that may have de-escalated this much earlier in the process? So we're not getting to the point where students are cussing at teachers or whatever else is going on there. So you can see is when it repetitively goes on, basically I'm drawing the sand on the line, am I not? I'm like, no, you need to get your book out or whatever else is. And we keep going, and I'm violating her personal space now. I'm in with that arm and a half length. She's getting more aggressive. And so you can see as an observer this whole storyline going to the point where she acted out and she's back in the administrator's office. Does that make sense? All right, so that's an ABC. It identifies, and when I finish an ABC, I can pretty much guarantee I have a very refined, operationalized target behavior that I'm going to be looking at. And again, Lauren may have multiple behaviors that we want to deal with, but I'm going to want is what's the one that's going to help her succeed the most in the classroom. After we resolve that issue, then I can go to number 2. Okay, you can't cure everything in the world, all cancers and everything else. You got to go one at a time as we're going through here. Okay, so now this is what I think is the most important thing is understanding the functions of underlying behaviors. And so this is my mnemonic, so you can do this because I'm not the smartest guy in the world, so I like easy things. California grapes, and we're going to go over each one of these things, okay, for why kids misbehave. So the first one is, especially where my early childhood folks, I don't know how many times I've been called out for early childhood. I'm like, this kid is not ED. You need a speech path in here. This is communication issues here, okay? You're going to see communication issues a lot, especially on early childhood, autism, and ID. So we held the second Night to Shine event in my church there. So we had 250 guests come in for intellectual disabilities adults. About 50 were nonverbal. And so I had my doc students, 8 doc students. We provided basically supervision if everybody was having problems. Every time we got called was nonverbal communication issues because they didn't know what the individual wanted. Did they want to go to the restroom? Did they want food? Did they want whatever else? One was even cigarettes or whatever else. We found out it was like, don't know what another communication is. If you get frustrated, think of that. If I can't communicate effectively, what typically happens? You act out. Okay? So understand is that communication is one of the things, when you go into early childhood, this is one of the first things that you should be looking at. Second, the most common, attention-seeking behavior, especially for young children. Very common. Okay? Any attention is better than no attention, okay? Especially for young children, especially if they're just leaving for the homes for the first time in unstructured settings to a structured. Now I'm competing with what? 19 other kids in a classroom? And who wants the attention? I want it from Miss Lauren or whatever the teacher may be. So you're going to see that attention-seeking behavior a lot. This is my favorite cartoon of all. Gratification, I'm not sure if you can read it. You are a very naughty rabbit. So, okay, if you got better ones, you can send it to me. I'll put them on. Many times, especially as you'll see behaviors done is, why did Steve push me off the slide? Because he wanted the slide. Why did you push me to take the toy? Because you wanted the toy, okay? So again, a lot of these things, especially with early childhood and kindergarten, is ecological environment I'll go in is if you've got preferable items, is there enough items for everybody in the classroom? You know, especially up to third grade or whatever else is, you know, if we're doing art, okay, you remember the Crayola boxes, you remember those. Were all Crayola boxes equal? No. Certain ones are really sharp and pretty, and certain ones are broken and everything else. Which ones do you think they're going for when they go up there? Yeah, do you think they may be a little high elbow hockeying and everything else going there for the pretty ones? So understand is many things for gratification is you can avoid those looking at the antecedents there in certain environments there. Life space crisis intervention. Here's another good one. All the other reindeer used to laugh and call them names. First things we'll talk about tomorrow there is, in life-space crisis intervention, your job is basically to be Joe Friday or Dragnet, is to build a timeline. Because again, all you came in is on the recess area and everything is, and Corey was fighting or whatever else. You don't know any storyline. So the first thing is you got to build a storyline is, okay, I know I walked in here at 2:45 with a fight. Well, who were the players involved? What initiated the thing and everything else? And what you'll find a lot of times in timeline is it's revenge. Because he did something in class earlier in math or whatever else. So in other words, the function of the thing. How many broken up girl fights? Does that take 2 weeks to figure out the whole storyline? Because again, it's like, you know, the Israeli-Palestine thing. She did this, he did that, he did that. You know, in other words, it's back and forth or whatever else is. So understand the timeline and how much you can do that. Acceptance factor, okay? Look, if you're going to hang out with us, you got to lose the bells. Peer acceptance is huge, okay? Everybody wants to be accepted. Okay, so in other words, I don't care, you know, my mother's in an assisted living now, you know, 93 years old or whatever else is. She goes up there, want to go out, play shuffleboard? No. Everybody's out there, you want to go. Within 5 minutes, everybody's out playing shuffleboard. Peer pressure is huge, okay? And what we'll talk about tomorrow is in behavior management, or this afternoon, is how to use peer pressure to your advantage, okay, for group reinforcement strategies. But acceptance is a huge issue. Power for bullying, for obvious, this is, you know, one of the major reasons for bullying, as you'll see, for a thing. For early childhood, you'll see breath holding, okay, and refusal to eat, okay. Do kids have much power? No, but what can they control? Their intake, can't they? They can have mom wrapped around the fingers by intake and something. So in other words, understand if they're working for power, and then interventions for power for the kids if they're working is, well, you can be line leader. In other words, if you have the behavioral contract, or you can pick whatever the game we're going to play at recess. In other words, set the rewards to satisfy that need for power. Does that make sense? So that's why the intervention has to satisfy the underlying function of the behavior. Escape, very common. Moses, knock it off, take your bath. Many kids don't like math, don't like science or whatever else is. They are going to try to avoid the whatever your instruction is. How do you make it more palatable, okay? Especially for kids with learning disabilities, okay? Did the instructor, you know, what is the Frye readability graph? You know, what is the reading level of the material that the child has? If my child, even though he's in high school, is reading at a third grade level, did the teacher make the modifications and make accommodations, or is he reading, because if he's at a third grade level, and he's at ninth grade, and what are textbooks typically written at? 1.5 to 2 grade levels above the grade level. So understand that gap. There's no way, there's no comprehension. He can't even decode the book, more or less there. So understanding for escape, how are the teachers making the modifications? Because a lot of times that causes a lot of behavioral problems in the classrooms in the gen ed. And then again, for those with autism, under and overstimulation there, okay? These things. Teachers with autism, will we like these lamps in here? Now we're going to really drive everybody nuts for the rest of the time that we're here. Why not? They hum, and they also do what else? They flicker back and forth. And some people, do you notice that or not? Some people will notice that, and others won't notice it until we've now picked it out. And they'll be like, oh, dang you for pointing that out. But again, with autism is the understim and overstim, make sure the environments and what you're letting in. So in other words, like the crowded hallways and everything else, can we avoid those environments? So again, those are the California grapes, the functions of the behavior. So when you go in there, first is to do the observation, anecdotal, looking at the child's behavior, seeing if we can operationalize it. And at the same time, see if we can start trying to identify what the underlying function of the behavior is. And again, I'm going to stop just to check for questions or anything else throughout that because there's a lot of material. So if you have something, please feel free to ask at any time. Now we're going to go into basically the heart of the discussion, which is the data collection methodologies. As I mentioned before, there's no perfect method for data collection. You're trying to pick which one of these methods gives the most accurate representation of the problem behavior that you're looking at, okay? Trying to record. And so we'll talk about permanent product, event recording, okay, latency all the way down there, all right? Steps for conducting observations there. You want a very refined operationalized target behavior. That's the first thing. That was the whole purpose of doing that ABC and everything else, okay? Where are you going to do it? Is it going to be in your English class, in your math class? I don't want to compare apples to oranges. So whenever I go in, it's 9:30 every day that I'm going to watch Joey. Okay? Right? I want to also talk to the teacher to find out when, if it's aggressive behavior, when are you most likely to see aggressive behavior? Is it during unstructured time like recess or lunch, something along those lines? That's when I want to do the observations there. Okay? And then again, pick means which one you're going to do. The easiest of all is permanent product. If you can do this, by all means, select this one, and especially for a kid who says, I'm not doing anything in the class or anything else there. The reason is I don't have to be looking at you, okay? All I have to do is I can teach my math class, because how easy is it to turn the smartboard, work over here, and then keep an eye on you to see if you've actually been instigating anybody else? It's impossible, okay? But what if it is you're just not doing anything in class, after the class you go, great job everybody, good job. Can I see that? Thank you very much. And I just collect the permanent product. Does that make sense? It's the easiest data you can collect. The keys here on this is I need to keep it consistent. Okay? And I need to make sure I'm not measuring something. So in other words, if I know you have a learning disability, I can't be giving you word problems in math or whatever because now I'm measuring your what? Your reading ability. So I'd have to do math calculation problems, make it similar difficulty, double digit without regrouping or whatever else. Make it consistent over time. The only issue with the permanent product is don't do it if you can't keep eyes on the person, in other words, for homework. Because Myrna may not actually be doing the homework. She may be going to her best friend and copying it or anything else. So you have to have some visibility on the individual for permanent product. Okay, does that make sense? Okay. But again, very simple. Don't need to keep an eye continuously on the person, but I just need to make sure that Steve actually did that thing in my work there. Okay. The next easiest one, which you've all done and you're all used to, we're going to see how good you are at this one, is frequency. How many have made your little stick figures? 4 and then 1 across. Everybody good? Let's see how good you are, okay? The worst thing you probably do in public speaking, besides going is putting your hands in your pockets. So target behavior for me, what we'll go over the next couple of slides, is just how many times the speaker, Joe Ryan, puts his hands in his pockets, okay? So you just keep your little tally sheet as we're going through here. Has everybody done a frequency tally in their life at some point? You guys should be experts. Here we go. All right. The key to frequency tally is it needs to be a distinct beginning and a distinct ending. It can't be something like, anybody have a friend who's a tapper? My colleagues, I call her Thumper because she can make the whole floor vibrate by going, with her foot after a while. She gets that movement going there. So it can't be something because I can't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So a clear beginning, and it also happens frequently. So I don't want to do something like fighting or whatever else or anything, or talking in class. Did you see the movie? Did you see Star Wars? It was pretty cool, wasn't it? In other words, was that 1? Was that 2? Because now it's a conversation. There's no clear beginning, clear ending there. So frequency, if it's a clear beginning, clear ending, works great there. Advantages, very simple. We're all used to it. You count up the tally marks or whatever. He did it 7 times. He picked his nose 7 times today. Did it 9 times, whatever. We do the intervention, and we get him down to 1, 0, whatever it may be. Okay? All right. Interval. These are probably the most common methodologies for that. Okay, we're going to talk about partial, whole, and time sampling. Whole intervals, I'm going to break down a time period, like a minute, into 10-second periods. And I'm going to look to see if the behavior, such as out-of-seat behavior, okay, was done for the entire 10 seconds. So if Steve was out of his seat for the entire 10 seconds, it would count. If he was out for 9 seconds and sat his butt down again, does it count? No. Okay, so you already see the advantages and disadvantages of it. First of it is it takes 100% commitment in me to observe Steve as opposed to permanent product where I'm teaching my math and then going back there. But again, not always accurate because he has to do the behavior for the entire period there. And so this is an observation sheet that you can use for that, and basically it breaks it down into time periods for 6 seconds or however you want to do it. You can do it for 30 seconds, however your time period. And basically just put an X in it. And so out of that, for 30 seconds, out of that for 5 minutes, he did it for 6 out of it. Gives a good representation, okay? Now, where certain behaviors like out-of-seat behavior, would frequency be a good use for out-of-seat? Because it does have a distinct beginning and distinct end, does it not? Would you use frequency? Talks among yourselves for 10 seconds here while I get a drink of water. Would frequency be a good one? Where is my water? There it is. Since I picked on Steve so much, I'm going to let him stretch his leg. How many here think frequency would work pretty good for out-of-seat behavior? How many think it would not? How many are not too afraid to raise a hand or either or because they think it's a trick question? Steve, can you stand up for a second and let you stretch your legs? So Steve comes into my classroom, stands up, and then he goes play with his buddies or whatever else, but he never does what for the rest of my period? Sits his butt down. That's it. How many times frequency tally is it going to show? 1. So understanding, that's what I'm saying. There's no real good observation bad. It depends upon the behavior that you're observing is which one that you're going to use to record that most accurately reflects it. This one, if he did that, he would be out for 100% of the observation periods. That's a pretty accurate reflection of him. Does that make sense? Now, for an ADHD child, I could care less if he gets up for a second and gets back because I know Steve just needs to get his blood flowing or whatever and get back. So that allows it, because it wasn't for 10 seconds, he probably couldn't instigate his peers around him. Does that make sense? But it allowed him to stretch his legs. So frequency, whole interval is pretty good. Partial is probably the most common. And partial, I do the exact same thing, but if Steve gets up for any portion of that time, even for a second, it would count. Okay. Now again, that may not be that accurate if it was a child with ADHD because it was okay for me for him to get up for a second or two if he just wanted to stretch, but I was more concerned of him instigating the peers around the classroom and disrupting my math class. So it's just up to you which would be more appropriate. You had a question?
Oh,
Laura.
reading.
Oh, okay. I'll get the bouncing ball if you'd like. But basically on this one, the same thing is if he does the behavior at all that, and again, what was it? Recurrent occurrence, discrete behavior, make a statement of peer teacher in class time in a pleasant tone, which includes either praise, politeness, or whatever else, bam. And any time that occurred, that happened. So if you want to do courtesies, increase courtesies or whatever, again, a pro-social behavior, a good way to do that. Again, advantages, it's a very accurate thing. The disadvantage, it takes a tremendous amount of time and effort. So in other words, I can't do this. I have to get the school counselor, an administrator, a buddy, paraprofessional, somebody else in my classroom to observe Joey for that 15 or 20 minutes. And again, you don't have to do this for the whole hour. So if you know at the end, as Joey typically acts out at the end of my classroom, just ask the para or whatever else to start collecting the observation towards the end of the classroom. So in other words, help everybody else. In the last 10, 15 minutes, she just drops back to the classroom so it's not obtrusive. And then she basically just watches him for the last 10 minutes because maybe that's his limit or whatever towards the end of the day. Okay, time sampling. This is not a very accurate one. But it's not bad if you don't have time to get into the classroom, and I just want to see if it's really a problem. And so what it is every 10 minutes or something like that, I've got numerous vibrating watches or whatever, time watch 3 or whatever else is. Basically, just at the end of 10 minutes, I'm going to look at Steve to see if he's out of his seat. And then I'm just going to go yes or no. Now, obviously, it's not very accurate because Steve may have been out for 9 minutes and 30 seconds and sat his butt down. The minute it vibrated, I turned around, he was exhausted, and he sat down or whatever else. And I'm not going to count it. What I do like time sampling for is to teach kids self-monitoring, because that's the most important is I don't want to go around the rest of my life with Steve and remind him how to do certain behaviors. I want the child to start monitoring, are they paying attention, are they writing, are they on task, whatever your behavior is. So now I give them the watch, it vibrates, and they're just like, whoa, was I on task, was I not on task? And I use this with the life students when we put it out because I can't afford to have a job coach with them 24/7 when they're in the environment out there. So if I know a person they start listening to their Walkman, they go away from their job responsibilities, we'll personalize the message to say, are you on task? Are you performing or whatever else? So they can self-monitor, and I don't have to have a boss come in and say, we can't have Steve here anymore because we always keep finding him in the copy room just goofing off or whatever else. In other words, that's an easier way. So self-monitoring is a nice way. If you do this, my recommendation is you set your watch the same time. And you go up to Myrna or whatever else, and if it's math, productivity, or whatever else is, you have her self-record, and you just go up there and go, good job. Okay? I don't care if she got 1 out of 100 that she was actually. I'm going to reward her and reinforce her behavior. Why would I do that? What happens if I were to reinforce her for every good behavior, only the good behaviors that she was on task for? What am I teaching her to do? What does every little kid do when they want something? Lie. What I want her is accuracy. I want to teach and reinforce accuracy, and plus it gives me an opportunity to develop baseline, what her true performance is. If she's on, maybe Myrna's on task 10% of the time. Well, that's great. Now I set my goal for 20% or whatever else, or 30%. But if I just only reinforce her in the beginning when she's at 10%, there's no way she's ever going to move to 10 to 80%. Okay? Behavior doesn't change that way. Behavior is shaped over time. So we take incremental steps. So the most important thing is teach your accuracy, reinforce that, and see where it goes. So time sampling. Right. Advantages and disadvantages, very easy to implement. Not very accurate whatsoever. I would never set up a behavioral goal based off time sampling or anything else other than if it was self-monitoring on that aspect. Okay? Duration recording. Many times, especially tantrums. How many here deal with children with throwing tantrums? Okay. Maybe it's the duration of it. Because all kids have tantrums or meltdowns, do they not, right? But do they go for an hour? In other words, so what dealing with Lauren? What age group? Elementary. So what would be a normal child's behavioral tantrum? How long for?
10, 15 seconds. Don't get their way, stomp off.
And they stomp off mad or whatever else. So what if Joey gets mad for a half hour afterwards or whatever else, or my whole morning? Remember, again, back to like children with autism. When they get upset in the morning, is it just well, it's over, blows over? When they get upset, what happens? Your whole day is miserable, is it not? Okay, so in other words, the number one thing is not to escalate, the students in regards to that. So again, it may be reducing maybe an escalation that lasts for an hour, 2 hours, to maybe 45 minutes, 30 minutes. Does that make sense? So duration may be a good thing for how long, or separation anxiety if it's the first time a child's experience. The drop-off lane. Okay, I don't know how many times I've been called to where the moms drop off the kids and they're on the floor spread out just having a complete meltdown or whatever else is. Again, if it's for 5 minutes, one thing. But again, if it's for 20 minutes and you're basically escorting the child in, there lies a whole issue. Plus you got that whole backup car lane going on the issues. Okay, so average duration for the thing, or it could be total duration. Maybe it's something is prosocial for writing. Okay, so in other words, how long will he or she be engaged in an academic thing? They only stay on task for 2 minutes, 3 minutes, or whatever else is. Maybe you're just going how much they're actually engaged in the thing. So you can collect the total duration or something. Okay, and again, it's pretty simple. So how long he or she was engaged in the thing, you can average it or you can total it. Okay, whatever works best for you to reflect the behavior most accurately that you want to change. Okay, if I did residential, so everything, PE coach and everything else, and many times we're just getting the kids to exercise, walk around the track or whatever else. What happens when they walk to the other side of the track? They all shut down, every one of them, because they know you're at reaching yelling range or whatever else, and whistle range and everything else. So in other words, I just want you to go longer. I want you to walk longer. I want you to walk for 10 minutes or whatever else. Okay. All right. Advantages, useful and interesting, how long the behavior is. Okay. Again, for tantrums, things of that nature. And then again, latency. This is huge for teachers. So when you see an upset teacher, guaranteed it's latency. This is what pisses off moms. This is what pisses off teachers. Think, how many here have children? How many here have been mad at their children at any one time point? Is it because they did not do what you asked? In other words, how about cleaning up that room? I'm sure the first time it uttered from your lips, that room was spotless afterwards and ready for inspection, was it not? Okay? So what is it? Latency is the time that you gave that command to the time they initiated response to it. Teachers, how much, again, I'm from South Carolina here, you know, coming in, so I'm not familiar with your school system, but you have the same thing as South Carolina. You have what, about 2-hour lunch? Hour and a half? How much you have? 20 minutes? 20 minutes. So if you're getting your class down to the cafeteria and it takes them 5 minutes to line up, well, obviously the administrators here, you're kind enough to shift that whole schedule to the right? So they maintain that 20-minute lunch period there? Now, so do you understand why teachers get so upset with latency, is following directions? So in other words, it may get everybody lined up. If you can get them from 5 minutes to like 30 seconds or a minute, are most teachers happy? They're static, are they not there? So latency is how much getting on task. How many here deal with kids getting on task? I'm teaching math, algebra. Everybody's out working on the problems. You haven't got the book out of your bag yet. Do you see the issues with latency? Okay, so those are easy ones to measure. Is the teacher gave the command, but the key is it's got to be a clear command. And I don't care if you go back to elementary where it's flipping lights or whatever else, you play music. You know, we have a gym on the thing they play, it's closing time or whatever else, which means, hey, you've got 5 minutes to finish your set or whatever else, and we're clearing everybody locks going on. There's got to be some prompt, okay, visual, gestural, whatever it is, that the student hears and understands before they go. Now, don't be like for ADHD kids, don't even waste your voice, okay, until what? You have what? Eye contact, okay? Don't even do it. And I've seen more teachers go, well, I told Joey 15 times. Like, yeah, but Joey was looking the other way, talking with his friend or whatever else. So until, don't even, you're just wasting, you're aggravating yourself. Get eye contact. Deborah, line up, please. Bam, okay? And now you can start that initiation, okay? And that is latency recording, okay? Advantages of it, it's very easy to do. It's just got to be a clear command for whatever that the student understands to when he initiates, not to when he completes, because completion is a different thing. It's based on skill level now, not just following direction there, because if it's math completion or whatever else are lining up, it's based on the individual. So whenever he initiates to do something. Cleaning room, I don't know how bad your room is, Steve, or your kid's room is. Okay. Topography is the shape of the behavior, okay? What does it look like, okay? For those teaching writing or whatever else, I'm sure you're familiar with this, B versus D and everything else there. What does it look like in regards to he bites his fingers when it gets, you'll see that a lot, especially with children with autism there. When they get upset, those fingers go right to the mouth, okay, and they clamp down on it, okay? This is a difficult one to measure, and I deal with this a lot being an ED person, okay? Force. Well, self-injurious behavior. How many here have dealt with children who do headbang behavior? Okay. Does that not scare the hell out of you? I mean, they're just slamming their head in the back of the thing as hard as they possibly can. It's like harder than I could possibly even punch a person if I tried or whatever else. And you're like, okay, well, how would I measure reduction of that to a force to the point where it would be maybe just a self-stim behavior for that? Okay, so those are the issues. Force is very difficult to quantify, okay? So you want to do is basically the elimination of it, but at the same time is if you do get down to the point where he's biting, but he's not drawing blood or anything there, that's an improvement in the behavior, but it's very, very, very difficult from behaviors to quantify on that, okay? All right, locus, where does it occur? Is there certain parts of the behavior? I've had students that just hide under their desk when they get caught lying or whatever else. They won't come out there. Do they bite certain parts of their hand? Do they do something? Is there certain areas of their, in other words, so to change that aspect of it. Okay. This is an outline here real quick of different methods that you can use just as a snapshot. You know, in other words, so when you get operationalized this definition there, the next question to determine is which method would give the best, most accurate picture. Does that make sense? Okay. And so this is just, again, whether it deals with time, whether it's a discrete, continuous there. Again, so if it's discrete, event recording. If it's a continuous thing like tapping, then probably the interval, partial, or whole interval would be a better one. If it deals with time, then you're dealing with either latency or duration there. Most teachers are going to be more important concerned with the latency. I guarantee on that one there. All right. Now, the most important part is observer agreement. How good were you? How many tallies do you have, Myrna? How many times did I put my hands in my pocket? That was pretty simple. You lost track. Well, what did you stop at? Who counted? Who counted? What did you get?
I had 5.
5. Anybody lower than that? 6. 5. Very good job. In other words, yeah, I probably did it at least 15 times on the thing there. So in other words, understand is how difficult even a simplistic thing is. What were some of the issues there? And you just broached one.
The difference between actually having your hand in your pocket and not
They operationalize it. What exactly, and this is what happens, this is why I say when you first go in there, you do that ABC, because you've got kind of an understanding what this behavior is, but I don't believe that I can actually reflect it accurately, on different things. What happens when both hands went in? What happens if just the thumbs went in? Did that count? In other words, so the point is that it has to be so operationalized that there's no confusion in regards to what is and what is. Does it have to be up to the wrist? Does it any part of the fingers at all? And it doesn't matter in regards to it, but that's what I'm saying is just show even something as simple as that. And then what was another problem with this whole thing, data collection here? You couldn't see me all the time, could you? So in other words, and remember that obtrusive versus unobtrusive. If you want to be unobtrusive, you typically have to be behind the student. Whoops, sorry. Very difficult to do, especially as like, where's my high school teachers? Do they announce when they're going to instigate their peers? No, excuse me, Mr. Ryan, I'm about to pick on Jason right now. I just want to let everybody know that. Usually it's very subtle. It's very discreet. They know exactly when the teacher's turning away or whatever else is. So that's the difficulty is can you get clear observation of the student to observe that? What's another problem with it?
Your mind's on other things. Like I was trying to take notes.
Yeah, you're busy. And that's what I'm saying is all these observations, other than permanent product, is you're teaching a class. You've got 20 other kids in the classroom or whatever it may be that you're concerned with, your lesson plan, keeping pace. Is she paying attention? Need proximity control on this thing? The last thing I know is whether somebody was picking their nose or whatever it may be. So if I gather even 10% of the actual observations there, you're lucky. Do you see how difficult that is? And so that's why I was saying is you really need to have somebody train your paraprofessional. School psychologist may be too busy or whatever else. It'd be great if you have somebody more proper professionally trained. But again, just with practice, you can train anybody to do it, but they need to be dedicated to just the data collection. Otherwise, you're going to show behavior change on this student. Never really happened because all it was lousy data collection. Okay, does that make sense? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go in here. And the next part here is basically observer reliability. And so some of the errors here we talked about here, random error. Familiarity, if I just ask a para without training him or her, okay, the likelihood of getting accuracy out of that is pretty minimal, okay? So in other words, so how were they trained? Insufficient time, okay? Do they have time or did you task them as a one-on-one shadow with Bobby over here or whatever else at the same time they're doing data collection, which is many times how most of the data that I've seen is it's by the para who's a shadow to them, okay? And they're also teaching math and then recording on their own there. And the lack of concentration. I'm positive, I can't do that. I'm absolutely positive I had 100% of your attention and that none of you were thinking about where to eat or calling your friends or if your kids were okay or if you have to go shopping tonight or whatever else and pick up milk. You see all these other issues and if you ask a para or whatever else is, they're thinking of all those other life events too. So are they actually true? And that's what I'm saying. Keep it to 15 minutes or whatever else is where you can actually keep an attention span on the target, okay, to actually observe that. Because if you do it for a long period of time, the attention is going to wane, even at the best intended adult there. Systematic error, okay? This is a huge one. It's called observer drift. As you get to know, because when we talked about Steve, is when we start talking about out-of-seat behavior is, I said, well, he had to get out of the seat. And then I go, well, Steve's ADHD, and he was just really shifting his buttocks or whatever else. You start changing the definition just on basic knowing Steve. Does that make sense? Is the more you know him, the more you shift to what counts and what didn't count. It's called observer drift. The desensitizing students never collect. If you're not normally in that classroom, don't ever collect on that first day because you're not going to see normal behavior, okay? You're going to see basically, they're going to look at you, why is Mr. Ryan in the classroom? I have no idea what it's here for me or whatever else, and you're going to see a very different behavior for it. Observer expectancies, this is for later on, is if you give an intervention is the person recording the behavior shouldn't know that he started the meds, shouldn't know that he started an intervention because basically they may start drifting their behaviors to say changes occurred when it may not have, okay? And the biggie here is how do you motivate a paraprofessional to do this for 10, 15 minutes? You got to explain how important it is to them, okay? So in other words, why they're a critical component of changing Joey's behavior, okay? And selling that is a really big important thing. If it's just another task for them to do, then they're going to give that same amount of effort into collecting it. Okay. And agreement versus accuracy. And I like this one there. It's a fan, it's a spear, it's a snake. Based on what they were looking at there is agreement is between you and another person agreeing that the behavior occurred or not. Accuracy is were you right or were you wrong on it. Okay. So you could have said something and both agree on it, but you were completely wrong when the behavior occurred. And so this is just something you have to consider. And again, conducting agreements, when you first have a paraprofessional, somebody observe it, I would recommend that you train with them at the same time for 5 or 10 minutes so that you understand is what the behavior that is an example of it, this is a non-example of the behavior. Do it heavily up front because then you're going to be, otherwise you're going to see all this data and it's really just garbage at the end. Okay, it's very meaningless. Okay? All right, frequency ratio there. And basically is when you cut up there, when you train them, so if this was duration there, one person said that Danny threw it for 43 minutes of tantrum, the other person said 47 minutes. All you do is basically go shorter over the longer, and basically that's it. You want to over 80% agreement rate is your goal. If you're falling in 50%, you need to really talk about is either A, we need to reoperationalize this definition to make it more clear, okay, or we need to train whoever the paraprofessional is that's actually collecting the data or the teacher. Does that make sense? Okay, so but do this up front there. And then again, if you're doing numbers, number of nose picks, number of times hands in the pocket, same thing. Smaller number, 2 over 5 or whatever else, but again, as you're trying to get to 80%. The key here is, 7 over 9 or whatever else, and then basically equals to basic, almost, you're at 80% there. The key is, what I want to do is, many times you said you saw 5, right? 5. 5. Did they see the same 5? Bless you. Do we know if they saw the same 5? You may have took the first 5 and just stopped observing. You may have forgotten about it, saw somebody recording or whatever, like, oh, Joe wanted me to do this or whatever else and started doing this. So we don't even know if they're the same observations there, if that makes sense. So what this one is basically you compare based on the partial interval, the whole interval, and you see how many occurrences, agreements, and disagreements they do. And so what you're doing is in this one is it's agreements over agreements, disagreements. So if this was, your first name was? Mindy. And this was Jason, right? Okay, this was Jason, and we just compare it. And the greens are when they agreed. The reds are when they disagreed. Never agree on a non-occurrence of a behavior because it will artificially inflate it there. But does everybody make sense of that one there? So they agreed on this event, and this event. And so basically, now it's, even though they had very similar numbers, you can have an awful agreement rate on that. Does that make sense? So that's why it's important on partial whole interval is you just do that observation for data there. We talked about the observer biases, observer drift, observer expectancies. I think he's getting better because he started medications there. And the complexity. If it's too complex, I have one colleague, she's in there right now doing for FBAs, studying FBAs. She's got all my doc students going in there. And what she does is, at the end of every period, she has them for 10 seconds look at the entire class to see for disorganized behavior or whatever. I'm like, what the? What? There's no way. And they go, and they've been doing it for 2 weeks, and they go, we can't get reliability, And I'm like, you'll never get reliability. You'll be in there the entire school year because what your definition of it is in scanning, even if you were to scan at the exact same time, because you may have scanned from right to left, I may have scanned from left to right or whatever else, there's no way that you were ever going to take that unless you took a video snapshot for 5 seconds or something and then looked at that to determine that. But even then is not very accurate. So understanding how complex the observation is, keep it as simple as possible. I know they have a lot of behaviors that you want to change. Pick the one that's most important to you for the student's success. We could always come back next week or next month, whatever it is, to deal with the second behavior that he's displaying. And now I want to talk to you basically about how we show the parents. Because again, we're not going to bring this whole bunch of data and go, hello, Mrs. Seaman, how you doing? This is your daughter's performance, and drop a whole bunch of data on them. It means absolutely worthless, okay? You just wasted all your time. You want to keep it as simple as possible to show that. And here's some different designs to do this, okay? The first one we're going to talk about is called an A-B design. And all it is we recorded baseline data, how frequently behavior occurs, and this is calling out in class, okay? And then we do an intervention, and we just plot it on an Excel spreadsheet, okay? And that's all we do. And it's simplistic, so this is basically several weeks, almost a month's worth of data or whatever else you go in there, and you present it within 10 seconds to a mom or a dad, okay? And is your intervention effective or not? And you basically have a decreasing trend, number of call-outs in the classroom there, with, looks like Joey's doing great in the class. Does that make sense? It's a database decision or that. An A-B design. The problem with an A-B design is I can't determine, okay, well, let me go back here for a second. I can't determine that this is actually what caused this. And there's a couple of threats, we call it internal validity, but basically is there may be other interventions at home. Maybe mom started a behavior contract with him at the same time. So in other words, you can't rule out other factors that may have changed the child's behavior. But most teachers don't really care. You know, most of the teachers are like, is the behavior gone or not? And if the behavior's gone, most teachers are thumbs up, and this is what like 90% of all schools will do, okay? So an A-B design, collect the baseline long enough to determine and predict what the next performance is going to be. So we should be pretty confident after this 5 data points that he's somewhere between 7 and 10 call-outs per class period. Does that make sense? Okay. If the trend's going up or down or erratic, you may want to continue on just to see where the behavior is. But typically, weeks worth of data collection is more than enough, and then do the intervention to see the change there. If you want to prove that that was actually the intervention, if it was attention-seeking, whatever else, you're going to have to do a more advanced design. And the most common is a reversal design. And this is basically, I'm taking baseline, I'm giving an intervention, I'm taking it away to see if change reverts, and then I'm putting it back again, okay? This is one of my life students. We published this about 2 years ago as always work. Time for, 45 IQ, time means very little to nothing. Absolutely. Always late to work every single day. Well, what happens when you're late to work every single day? You get fired, okay? We don't want that, okay? We want her employed, okay? Great worker and everything else, she's just never showing up. So we gave her a vibrating watch with time to go to work, commands on when to go to work. So the first one we did was 15 minutes where we let her be late for 15 minutes, and then we would tell her, okay, Jill, you got to go to work or whatever else and leave. So she hit what's called the ceiling effect, where we told her every single day. We gave her the watch. What happened? Whoa, she's on time every single day. The next day we took it away. The first day she kept asking what time it was, what time it is, what time it was, or whatever. Is it time or whatever else? By the second day she completely forgot it back to her ceiling effect, where we had to tell her. We gave her watch back again. On time every single day. Great worker, holds the job, not fired. Okay? So in other words, that's an AB-AB if you want to average show that that's a functional relationship between this and that. Sometimes, I already talked about is, Myrna's never done any work in my class. I've been teaching algebra here for whatever, for all semester. We're in, February now? She's never done anything. Do I really need to waste a week of my time to go up to Myrna and collect her permanent product or whatever, which is basically going to be, Myrna? Nothing, okay? Don't, okay? Just do the intervention and then pull the intervention. So maybe I provide her modified reading materials or whatever else at her grade level and see if now she does the intervention. And then I'll pull it away, give her the traditional math book or whatever else, and then if it shifts, then I'll give her back the new modified. Does that make sense? So don't waste any time and go, well, we need to collect baseline. She hasn't done anything. There's no reason to collect baseline there, okay? All right. Many times you go in there and you go like, I think Steve goes, in other words, well, I think it may be something else besides attention or escape or whatever else. And that's going to happen. Many times in meetings you're going to sit around and you go, Lauren's going to think it's attention. She's hiding her name tag. She's not even aware. Oh, we got to kick her out. I don't have one either. I got to go too. All right. So in other words we have disagreement about what it is. And they both sound like great ideas. So what do? What we do is we collect baseline, and then we start with Lauren's, and then we start with yours, and then we'll start with yours. And we'll go basically different things to see which one's more effective. Does that make sense? And that's called a changing conditions design. And so basically we're not sure, but again, this one is, to see, again, performance, if we can increase percent correct on the thing. We'll try different interventions. And if you look at, they both worked, but B definitely had higher performance level than C. So even though, yes, yours was good, Lauren's was a little better. Let's go with Lauren's. Does that make sense? And sometimes we do an intervention and we see, like cutting down swearing or something else, maybe we reduce it. Maybe Joey swears like a little sailor, 100 times, and we get it down to 50, but 50 is still a lot for a public school or whatever else. Maybe we want to get down a little bit. So we'll leave B in place because it was effective, but we'll add this next component of C. Does that make sense? And so this is the real world because kids don't always respond exactly how you were hoping to get them. Does that make sense for everybody? Okay. Changing criterion. I like this one because this is how we really shape behavior. Behavior never changes over time. Is Kristen? Okay. Kristen is my sailor. You didn't know this, but she swears constantly in the class. I mean, literally, it's like 80 to 100 times in every class. It's like, it's a verb, it's an adjective, it uses everything, the F-bomb. Do you think, regardless of how good that intervention I come up with, Kristen's going to go from 80 to 0 tomorrow? It's never going to happen, okay? And it's the same thing as, even think of it as like, gaining weight, okay? So in other words, the kid wants to get onto the football team, okay? So Jason wants to get on the football team. We're going to try to increase his strength. Do you think he's going to bench from 225 to 400? No. What we're going to do is shape incremental change over time. That's how behaviors change. We shape it there. Changing criterion does this. So what it does is, it takes the baseline and basically continues to lower it over time. Okay? So just every here, who coaches? Say, what sport, Lydia?
Volleyball.
Volleyball, okay. So in other words, that's a tough one because it's not a time or anything else there. So in other words, how about aces or something like that, counting aces? You don't go from 0 aces, serving 0 aces to 10 or whatever else in the thing. You increase it slowly over time there, okay, with strength, performance, whatever we want to do. So what we do is we set goals. So if I was at, I don't know, say I'm at 250 pounds and I want to get down to weight to 195 you set realistic goals for the person to achieve each time. Now, if you want to establish a relationship for that, what you have to do, and coaches, you can do this too, there with your athletes there, is, okay, so it's 200, 195, 190, and you go, Joe, you've been so good on your diet, why don't you just go out and have pizzas this week or whatever, relax your diet a little bit, whatever. Do you think the person's going to do that? More than likely. If you go up and, you've been swimming really good, you've been doing, in other words, basically is you've been going out and you're swimming 500s, and you go, okay, so you've been at 536, 530, 528 or whatever else. I go, I want you to rest your body. You can go like 545 or whatever else. Do you think my athlete's going to do that? Yeah. And then I go, okay, well, good recovery now. Now we're going back on track again. That change of performance demonstrated the functional relationship that it's your goal setting is what changes the student's performance. Does that make sense? Okay. Certain behaviors, you obviously wouldn't want to do that. So I'm not going to say, okay, Kristen, you can swear man more. You've been doing really wonderful now, so go ahead and let it all loose. All right. So again, different things. How do you set the goal is? Well, you can do is the average of their baseline performance. You could do it as the minimum. If Kristen's only swore whatever else is, maybe she's gone as low as 70 times. Well, I know she's capable of doing at least 70 times, whatever else. So you can set that goal. But it basically is on professional competence, what you believe. Similar to coaches is you would believe what a person could start lifting weights at or whatever, or what speed he or she can swim or run at. Does that make sense? Based on your professional experience. All right. Multiple baseline. This one I like for working with gen ed teachers. I love this one. This is my favorite here. Every gen ed teacher that you've worked with has been wonderful, have they not? They're so accepting of all our students. Where's my ED teachers? First name is?
Kayla.
Kayla. Have you gotten the look when they come in, they get the paperwork or whatever else is like, oh yes. And Kayla, you're going to have my student for all the things. You're just going to bring them in homeroom, right? And then you're going to take it. Yeah. Some teachers are easier to work with than others, okay? So Melinda was a SPED teacher, okay? She went back into the gen ed classroom. She's wonderful. Bill or William?
Billy.
Billy's okay. I mean, he's fine with it or whatever else, but he doesn't, okay to work with. And here's my challenging teacher, Kayla, okay, who's definitely does not want my child in a room. Well, we're dealing with the swearing with Kristen, okay, because Kristen's been cussing all of you out or whatever else there. It's like, do I come up with this intervention that I don't know if it's going to work or not, and do I put it into all their rooms at the same time? You're going to be very accepting. Whether it works or not, you go, hey, Joe, good try, good effort. You're going to be like, yeah, it didn't work, Joe. What do you think Kayla's going to be like? Do you think she's going to be receptive to any more interventions I get? So what I do is a multiple baseline. I collect the baseline in all 3 of the classes. I go with the teacher that's most responsive to, okay, Miss Melinda. And she tries the intervention. If it works, now I go with the neutral teacher, whatever, Billy, okay, and it works. And now I go to my challenging teacher. I go, we've tried this with Kristen over there. It's worked really well in Melinda's and Billy's class. Would you like to give it a try? Do you see the buy-ins a little bit easier now? Okay. So again, many times we said does the child only have one behavior? I said Kristen swears a lot, but do you think, look at her. I mean, everybody, look at Kristen. Does she look like she only has one problem behavior? Kristen has multiple problem behaviors. What I can do is I could do interventions with Kristen on 3 of her behaviors. Okay, so I can work on her first behavior. When that responds, I click to the second behavior and I click to the third behavior. Or many of us have some children who display the same behaviors. So I may do it with Bobby, Susie, and Timmy. Does that make sense? So a multiple baseline, all it is an A-B design. It's very simplistic, but I don't want to go with all out because I don't know if it's works. So I don't want to do it with 3 students when I'm not sure if it's going to work. I don't want to do it with 3 teachers when I may get negative feedback from one of the teachers. I'm going to try with the most conducive one first. That makes sense of everybody. Okay, so that's multiple baseline. Alternating treatments. This is another way is when I have the different interventions. This is more complicated. I don't know if you really want to do it. I like the one where you just give the time. A, B, C. You could also, if you want to do, is try all of them at the same time. So what you do is say you have them for math, English, and science. You do intervention 1 the first day, you do intervention 2, you do intervention 3, and then we swap. You do intervention 2, you do intervention 3, you do intervention 1, and then you do intervention. You know what I'm saying is? So I'm giving all of them equal opportunity. I don't want to just do one intervention in math, one in science, and one in English, because it may be reacting different to the subject matter itself is. But basically, if I try all of them, and basically it's called counterbalancing, what we'll see is one will perform, such as B, was the triangles, outperforms the other interventions, if that makes sense. Okay? It's more complex, but you can do them all at the same time. I think it's easier just to go 1 week of yours, 1 week of yours, and 1 week of yours, and we'll see how they respond. But if you're daring. Now, when you do that, you just don't want to give parents a graph. Okay? What you want to do is provide meaning to the graph. Okay? And the way that you do that is you discuss a couple things. One is the change in mean. What is the average change? Did we reduce swearing from 80% or whatever else to 20% of the thing? Did we increase homework performance or whatever else is? So provide means. That's very easy. The other thing is the change in level. I want to see that first step off as quick as possible. Okay? The quicker that step off is, the more likely it's due to your intervention. The slower it takes to change, the less likely you can say it's due to your intervention. Trends is important. Say I have Lauren, who went from 100 on her test to an 80 to a 60 to a 40 to a 20. We do an intervention. She goes from a 20 to a 40 to a 60 to 80 to 100. What's the mean difference? 0. It's exactly the same, is it not? What's the reality difference? She's going from failing out of school to getting on the honor society. Does that make sense in the thing? So that's why it's not, just means isn't going to tell you much of a difference there is. So trends is a really important thing. If she was coming to to school, the same thing is she went 5 days, 4 days, 3 days, 2 days, 1 day, and then she went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. The mean is the same thing for her showing up, but the trend line is very different. Okay. So in other words, is one again is we're contacting the school resource officer. The other one is you're going to get an award for attendance there. Okay. And then again, variability. Where's my LD, folks? Where's my LD? Is inconsistency the only consistency with LD? Okay, and again but what happens with inconsistency is Joe gets an 80, an 80, a 20, an 80. What does that do to my GPA? I get a D, right? Or whatever else from the thing. What if you can get me consistent, my variability, 80, 80, 60, 80? Well, now I got a C. Does that make sense? All you're doing is you're tightening up my performance and variability, which is huge in certain populations like LD, okay, when the inconsistent performance dealing with it. So change that. Because the numbers may not be that wowed or whatever else is, but again, your son's going to do really good here as opposed to getting an F. Okay, I'm going to pop up Daniel here, and again, you should have it online. If you don't have it online, you can read it through here. I'll do the highlights of it. All right. And Daniel's in kindergarten. He's 5.5 years old. Okay. And again, referred for tantruming, aggression, non-compliance with teacher things. And I'll leave each section here just for a little bit there. Okay. Brought razor blades to school. Acts like a dog in class, licking, holding objects. Refused to trace his name because it scares me. Let's see. I'll go down. I'll hit just the highlights here. Family history shows with both parents and a younger brother. Okay. He has fine motor skills, average intellectual capability, short-term memory issues, though. Okay. Focusing on what he does is very uncontrollable. Okay. Let's see. Separated from his teacher easily. Great rapport one-on-one with the school counselor. Okay. He was relaxed and cooperative during the testing things. He said please. Couple of informations there. Volunteers' father was mean to him. Daniel referred to himself very times as Scorpion, Sub-Zero. Sucked his thumb. 3 magical wishes. Replied, toys. My dad would be nice. Wouldn't be given any stupid trouble. And I would be myself with my teacher. Okay. Again, intellectual functioning, average. Let's see. Clinical significance, what they show was thought process was clinically significant, and aggressive behavior was clinically significant. Okay, and I'll give you to the last part was the recommendations for evaluations for behavior, visual motor, She commented on his poor art skill. Thank goodness she didn't evaluate me. So then again, T-score acting out was high, withdrawal. Classroom observation, here you go. 30 minutes of observation. He basically had a meltdown. It was like nap time, rest time. They had a mat. Teacher took the mat away from him, held temper tantrums to get it back. When the teacher gave him back the mat, he went back to having the behavior tantrum again. The same behaviors there. That was the observation. Okay. So what I want you to do on this one then is, it's not really that relevant, but so again, is there one behavior on Daniel? It's probably like 6 or 7 that anybody could find in regards to him. What I wanted you to do is basically go is, which type of behavior do you think you would be interested in looking at? Talk with your peers here, your colleagues, and then go, well, how can we collect this data? How can we operationalize this definition? Get a little, because there's multiple behaviors here, and there's no right or wrong answer there. What do you think you and your colleagues would look at here with Daniel? How would you measure it? Because again, there's multiple different ways that we can measure it. Which one would give the most accurate picture or reflection of what Daniel's behavior is that you're trying to measure, and that you can see if it changes over time, okay, with whatever your intervention is. Make sense? Talk for a couple of minutes there, and then we'll talk about it.
You know what, for me, it was the self-injurious.
Okay, so you should have read through, finished reading through, should have picked the behavior, operationalized the target behavior, and then figured out now what methodology that you'd be using. And then after you do that is, what design you think would be good for you? What design? A-B, multiple. You can't pull A-B, okay? You get something other than A-B. Even though in the real world I know is everybody's going to do A-B. All right, we'll let you out a little bit early here. We'll give you another minute or so to put your final thoughts together. All right, let's hear what kind of behaviors that we chose to address. Because was there only one for Daniel?
No.
No, there's numerous behaviors for Daniel. Okay, so what are some of the behaviors that you thought were important? Let's go to the back group. I haven't talked to the back group in a while there, so here we go.
Aggression.
Aggression, okay, physical, and then I would say, is it going to be physical aggression or verbal aggression?
Well, we didn't know because we didn't have the thing to look at. So.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm just.
Okay.
Okay, physical aggression, and then it would be, and then I would go further, delve down a little bit more specific. Is it physical aggression towards peers, physical aggression towards staff, physical aggression like self-injurious behavior towards. Okay, okay, so SIB, self-injurious behavior. That's what I'm saying. You keep detailing because again, they're going to have displayed more than one. And your intervention of dealing with physical aggression towards peers versus staff may be very different intervention there. And so that's why you just keep drilling down. Good job. Okay, physical aggression. Who else had something else? Something different. Everybody picked the same one. Everybody picked the exact same one. On the other side, left side of the room, the dark side of the room. What do we pick? I feel like Star Wars here, the light side.
We picked hits at teachers, specifically hits at teachers.
Okay, physical aggression towards staff. Okay, that's an important one. Teachers love it. I'm getting the sign here, the Q25. We'll even get out early. Thank you. Never be the person holding people back from food. Okay, so physical aggression is one. Okay, and then if we deal with physical aggression, then we'd probably go to some of the other behaviors there. What are the other behaviors that you saw that we're dealing with? Anybody else? There was tantruming, okay. There was verbal aggression towards peers you can deal with. But again, I would have the priority of that. Now, physical aggression is towards how we're going to measure this. What observation method are you going to use? Duration for how long he hits a teacher, or?
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought we'd do self-injurious. Sorry.
Okay, self-injurious behavior. So we could do duration for how long it occurs there. Okay, what else could we do?
I think partial interval would be good.
Problem with partial interval on this one is I'm not sure if it occurs frequently enough for that you would measure it. So I think you'd have a lot of eyes on, there'd be a lot of zeros on the thing there. So good thing. So that one, could we do frequency? Yeah, frequency is probably the easiest one that you could do there, depending upon how long it occurred or whatever else, or if it reoccurred. If it reoccurred, then we may go more to the partial interview or something if it would stop on one replication again there. What's the function? Anybody get a guess of a function? Yeah. We're dealing with early childhood, okay? Many times, more than likely than not, what you heard was, what did he want more than anything else? He wanted time, one-on-one, he wanted attention, the thing. That would be one of the first things that I would probably guesstimate at was for younger children there, okay? The other thing for young children to look at is, important to look at when dealing with behaviors, is a skill deficit or is a performance deficit, okay? And anytime that you're dealing with kids with disabilities in itself is typically assume it's going to be a skill deficit there. Early childhood almost always consider it's going to be a skill deficit there. So what are you going to do to teach something, you know, what's a pro-social way to do that? What are some of the interventions you guys came up with? Anybody come up with an intervention? We're measuring it pretty good now. Now actually is if it's a retention. So talk with yourselves now again is, think for about 1 minute, talk with each other. So we're going to measure something for physical aggression. We believe it's to do with tension. What could we do for Daniel that would reduce the physical aggression, whether it be to peers, to staff, or himself, or self-injurious there, to replace that? But it has to satisfy his need for what? Attention. So you can come up with the greatest idea in the world, come up with, I don't know what the cartoon characters that he had or whatever else, you can come up with it, but if it doesn't satisfy attention, it's not going to reduce the behaviors. Okay, so talk with yourselves for about a minute, and then we'll... All right, what possible interventions have we come up with? And they're all going to be wonderful. So anybody brave soul, what would you do for attention seeking? Beautiful. Okay, so it's, again, based on the belief that it's a skill deficit, and for early childhood, I would 100% be supportive of that one there. Now, what design could we do? Could we do an ABAB? We never use a reversal design anytime that we're dealing with physical aggression or self-injurious behavior. Make sure you remember this one, okay? Because I never want to have somebody stop spitting at you, kicking at you, bending in the head, and then pull away an intervention that's successful and go, well, we're just going to test to see if this is truly the reason to see a head banging behavior. Does that make understand? So never want to do that. Never want to do a reversal. Great job. Never want to do a reversal design. This is a great one because, again, he does have multiple behaviors. This is a great one for multiple baseline design. So I can stop maybe physical aggression towards staff, as you were saying in the back. Then I could do physical aggression towards peers. Then I could do verbal aggression. Do you see what I'm saying? Is I would work my way down, but I would never want to remove an intervention that has been proven efficacious. If it wasn't, for whatever reason, we're all wrong, it wasn't attention, well, then I'd go to changing conditions, and I'd go A, B, and we go, guess what, guys? It didn't work. Let's not be Einstein's definition of insanity here. Let's come up with another function or whatever it is, or another intervention that may satisfy that need for attention. Does that make sense? And so we're not always going to be right. It's as much art as there's science there, and this is why groups together, bringing their expertise in different areas from behavior to early childhood to all different areas for administrators, comes up with a much better solution than just one teacher on their own when they're dealing with 20 students. Okay, and so as bounce ideas. Idea thing. Don't feel bad if your idea gets shot down just because well, I thought it was and then you come up Lydia comes up with a much better idea. I go, hey, let's lead with yours. If it doesn't move, then maybe we'll use mine as a backup intervention there. All right. So that's the overall of data collection, how you can incorporate it in the school. As you see, it takes practice. The most important of the thing is you have to train the data collectors. Otherwise, it's just complete garbage. And you're going to see behavior changes when nothing changed at all. It's just because you saw the first 5, he saw the last 5 or whatever else there, and you're going to see high fluctuation in the performance. If you see high fluctuation in the performance, you should look at is, do I have that operationalized definition tight enough? And maybe I need more examples of calling at, especially with early childhood, because we just did the play therapy one in the special day school, it was bothering kids in circle time. Well, if Deborah was calling out, but it was related to the story, well, I'm not going to count that against her. She was engaged in the story. That's a good thing. But if Renee was calling out about the weather outside, I'm like, well, that's irrelevant. So, give examples for the paraprofessional, because remember, they have very minimal training in this. But you have to have somebody who gets eyes on the person for a good 10 to 15 minutes to do that. If you can't, then permanent product is the best way to do that. But it may not address, such as physical aggression, permanent product's not going to do very much at all for you there. So based on, that's why there's no good one, there's no bad one. You're going to have to determine, but you have to really think it out. And the first couple times in your classroom, don't worry about the data collection. All you're in there is to find out is to come up with a good operationalized behavior, because the first time you're going in there, I guarantee you it's going to be, she's driving me crazy. You know, well, what does that mean again? And your threshold for driving you crazy is going to differ from Steve to Joe to everybody else who's looking at that, okay? So refine it as much as possible. They said I'm supposed to leave a couple minutes for questions there, so I'll open it up for questions. And then again, if everybody else wants to beat everybody to a lunch line or whatever else, feel free to exit stage left there or what have you. But I'm thank you very much for your time today. But I'll open it up for questions. Everybody's like, are you kidding me? You just said I can cut loose. I'll go to the dark side of the room. Any questions over here for those hiding in the dark? Okay. Was that good? Thank you so much for coming today. I'll be doing behavior management this afternoon, and tomorrow I'll be doing crisis de-escalation for aggressive students. But again, thank you. Have a wonderful conference. It was great meeting you all. Bye-bye.